Good morning. I am here with Joseph, who is a program director with the Restorative Justice Housing of Ontario program. And Joseph, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure to meet you and to speak with your audience through you. Thank you very much.
Now, if we would like to begin with maybe a little bit of your story and how you're connected to RJHO, and where would you like to start?
Well, my story is a long one. My background. I was once a lawyer and respected member of the society, so to speak, and then I went to prison, and
Oh,
I lost everything during that experience. I had what I could talk about later, sort of a divine intervention experience in Kingston Penitentiary. And when I left prison, like most ex-prisoners, I had very difficulty finding a place to live. Because in Canada, you can openly discriminate, in Ontario particularly, you can openly discriminate against someone for housing or a job based on their criminal record, no matter how long it is. Maybe you just got out of prison, or maybe you committed a crime 20, 30 years ago. People would say, yes, you have first and last month's rent, but we just don't want to rent you for whatever reason. So I faced that difficulty, and because of my experience in prison, I tried to take some good from my bad of my experiences, and I was working in the area. I was involved in the creation of a documentary that was a white-collar crime prevention documentary, and someone from Restorative Justice Housing, which was a new charity that was just formed, saw it, and they thought I'd make a good program director because of my ability to interact with men who've been in prison, because I did time in maximum security prisons, and also property developers, homeowners as such, which would be renting homes from, to then house ex-prisoners. I thought I would be a good conduit for that because you can imagine when let's say you face a homeowner who's renting their house saying, I would like to rent your house, and in your house we're going to put a bunch of ex-prisoners. Now, so I'm sort of the face of that, so I'm not too scary, not too intimidating. And I would always say that I know you have preconceptions about what an ex-prisoner is or how they are. I'm going to tell you they're going to be better than your average tenant, or better than other, your friends might own rental homes. They're going to be better than their tenants. And was our goal from the start, to change. One level was, of course, to provide housing for ex-prisoners who are committed to reforming their lives. But also, I think was maybe a bigger goal was to change the perception of ex-prisoners as employees, as tenants, by showing, doing a better job than what people expect, so that when, maybe years down the line when, RJHO is gone, or no connection to RJHO at all, you give someone a chance to rent a room, or you give someone a chance in a job. And that's, I think, our long-term goal. It certainly is my long-term goal, to change perceptions. And from our own example, from our very first landlord, referred us to our second landlord, who then rented a second house to us, that same landlord. I think we're doing a good job in that area, and I think this is a program that can be replicated throughout Canada. It's certainly less expensive. We receive no government money whatsoever. So whatever our monthly costs are for providing a room to somebody, it's far less than what the government would in a socialized housing setting. So I think it perhaps could be a future model, because there is a supply in the market of rental homes out there, and we provide rooms within those homes, modest rooms for people that want to turn around their lives for the better, and in so doing, become productive, tax-paying members of society, and that benefits everyone. So that's the long and short of it. Maybe that's too long, but that's the long and short of it then.
it gives everyone a good chance to sort of see how this works, because yeah, RJHO, I remember hearing about it years ago, and immediately you start thinking of a thousand ways that could go right and it could go wrong, and like
Yes.
especially for, I think this is the thing for a lot of us that work in nonprofits and deal with fundraising or deal with charitable work, is right off the bat, I think the elephant in the room is that working for organization that deals exclusively with people that were recently incarcerated, that is not as an easy sell for a lot of people as, say, Save the Wildlife Foundation or something involving children or illnesses. It is much easier to advertise for summer camp donations than it is for, like, the recently incarcerated. And
A hundred
that,
percent, I agree with you. But it is a need in society if you think about it. So well, again, my example, I got out of prison, couldn't find a place to live. Now, I was very fortunate. There's been many experiences in my life where I sort of, the divine interventionist types, where I actually was playing a football pool, the football Sunday pools that people have, and I co-won it for like $11,200, and I took that entire amount of money and I used it to pay my entire year's rent when I got out of prison, so that the person who's rented to me didn't have to do a Google or a criminal record check, etc. They had no risk of being a credit check. So I was very fortunate. But most guys, of course, get out of prison. Maybe they've been away so long they have no more family connections, or they burned some bridges through other issues, and they get out and they have maybe negative Google searches and certainly criminal background searches, and they can't find a place to live, even though they want to pay the first and last, or can, and rebuild their lives, and they can't. Yeah, so obviously it's easier to raise money for the squirrels in some forest somewhere. People want to donate to that. But this is a needs society, and if it's not met, the problem will only get worse because you have growing homelessness and whatnot. If someone really is committed to reforming their life, like what I say when I deal with the guys I work with, I will work as hard as you will work to rebuild your life. And I think if society has someone who made a mistake, paid their debts to society, and wants to reform their lives, I think it's long-term positive for society to work at least as hard as that person is willing to work to reform their lives. And in our case, it's really give someone a safe place to live, to build from that. Because you can imagine yourselves. Everyone in your audience is doing better than my average guy who comes out of prison. Imagine for the grace of God, something went wrong in your life. Maybe you had a few drinks one night, had a car accident, killed somebody. You went to prison, but in that experience, you lost all your family and friends, no connections whatsoever. Imagine how hard it would be for you to rebuild your life where you have to live in a shelter. Or I had got one of my first residents, actually, my third resident, he was living in a storage locker. So he would rent an industrial storage locker for a couple $100s a month, and he would sneak in at night and then sneak out in the morning living in that. Imagine how hard it would be to rebuild your life, maybe find a job when you're sleeping, basically homeless, to rebuild your life. So we give a person a safe place to room. We let them interact with positive members of society and volunteers. And from that, I've had a tremendous success stories that however difficult the job is and the challenges have, when you find one success story, you go, well, it's really worth it because I know that person wouldn't be where he is today in a positive way, but for RJHO's existence. So that's what keeps us going.
Absolutely. It also brings me to my second part of the question is, when we talk about the people that you work with, who your clients are, who were recently in prison, is there a particular group that you're looking for, or is it sort of anyone that comes in the door, or is there a criteria for who qualifies here?
What we found through the years is that generally the typical, it's a man about 55 to 60 in that range who's done at least 10 years or more in prison. And if you think about it, it makes sense why that person would come to us. They're old enough that they've been in prison long enough. They probably lost their family, they've passed away, or they've broken their connections, and maybe they're maybe too old to work anymore. They have other issues in prison. The general health care in prison is terrible in Canada, and so if someone's 55 coming out of prison after 20 years, it looks and maybe acts like if someone's much older because of the diet and the stressful conditions and the violence in prison. So that and usually they're in the 55 range. If they're younger, then they're getting a old age supplement, which is about $1,500 a month. So maybe with that much money, you could find a rooming house to get you a place to live on your own. So they're coming out and they may be getting OW, Ontario Works, or Ontario Disability Support Program. And for example, the Ontario Disability Support Program gives you $500 now, just changed now to I believe $525 a month towards housing. In Toronto, you cannot find a place to live for $525. And imagine it's not disability, it's Ontario Works. You get $397 a month. You cannot find a place to live for $397 a month unless it's sleeping on someone's couch.
Like, you literally can't afford groceries at that amount.
You can't. So it's very difficult. So that's the kind of person who comes to us. Usually a referral from prison chaplains for the most part. They've had they met someone in prison through the years, and they think this person's ready for reform. And they refer them to us. We have an interview. We see if they're a good fit. The only restriction we have is because of our relationship with our landlords. The very first landlord asked that there be no sex offenders among the men in their house. And that's sort of been, and they told the second landlord, told the third landlord. So that has been our only restriction. So we are not able to take sex offenders, but everything else, every other offense we can. But and we're not trying to just take randomly people. We think because the need is so great. There's say 100 applicants. You say I want to take this one of the 100, and why? Because this person is in need, one, but two, I think this person has potential for reforming their lives. But and the only thing holding them back is a safe place to live, and that's the kind of person that we're looking for.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this over the past little bit, especially with COVID, that no doubt was a cannonball through every part of life, every demographic. I do not know a single person that was impacted by COVID or not impacted by COVID, let alone if you have someone that was in prison for a period of time and then COVID just went through the prisons like nobody's business. And then you're coming out and suddenly any of those resources that were available, whatever thin resources were available in the first place, they're now gone because people don't want to be in connection with anyone. If you have no real idea of what the world has been like for the past 10 years because you've been in prison. And the world changes so quickly that having an organization that's able to say, here's what the landscape is, here's what the rules are, here's what the community is, and we can find a way to do it, because right now, to try to do it on your own, it is almost impossible.
And we started our very first our very first house opened up right at the start of COVID. So we had all
Perfect
the
timing.
restrictions I'm facing, and I said, well, you know what? These restrictions are not going to make this possible. So I've just got to do what I got to do. So I would still visit the guys. I would still move people in because you had to, because I'm taking a guy from a homeless shelter or on the streets into a house. I'm going, well, can I say, oh, the COVID rules prevent me from interacting? I can't. Right? This is your one chance to change this person's life. I just had to do what I had to do. And it worked out. We sort of got through it. But you're right, it was very difficult because the volunteers you thought were in place in the beginning, well, they're not as, sort of direct or adventurous as I am. So they'd say, well, I can't interact because of these restrictions, et cetera. So then you have to fill in the blank, fill in the void with the volunteers do that. I'm filling it in, sort of thing. And we gladly we got through it. So we started one house. Now we have 4. So who knows what next few years will bring. And it's all because you have a goal and you almost a mission in the sense you say we have to do this because if we don't, no one's doing it in this sense. These say 15 people we have providing a house, what would they be doing right now? Their lives would be certainly, arguably, much worse, but for our existence. And that sort of pushes you through. So if there are any future restrictions, I'll probably break them again in some ways to make it happen because I feel a bigger obligation at that point.
At that point, you're dealing with people that, the worst case scenario, they've already dealt with the worst case scenario. It's already happened.
Yeah.
So, what
Yeah.
more can we do at this point, right?
That's right. Oh, that's right. Prison is not a pleasant place. I'm going to tell everybody. I know there, people who, again, came from a white collar world. No one has a lot of experience with prison, so they think, oh, there's all these fantastic things in prison, all these luxuries. And I said, when I started my sentence, I slept on the floor. I was in the Don jail when the Don jail was around Toronto. So I moved it into that range. A range is a collection of cells. So I slept on the floor for a week because it was a 3 men in one cell. 2 guys have the bunk beds, and the third guy sleeps on the floor. That's me. And so these are the kind of things you get in prison, very common, where there's no luxuries. I remember we had one book on that range. It was a Harry Potter book, and I read that 3 times. I was there for a month. One book for 30 guys. That's all it is. And there was no library access, nothing. We actually didn't have a television there. But that was very typical. So there are no lot of luxuries in prison. If you think your tax money's going to get people in prison this fantastic life, it's not. It's probably for guards and other structures you're building, but very little reformation going on in prison where you can helping them reintegrate in society. Very common when we get men from prison that they have no identification. You would think it'd be an obligation on the prison system to make sure this person being released to society has all their ID in place. They don't. So I've had guys with just their photocopy of their prison card, and I have to try to get them ID for the next weeks or so to get them reintegrated. But that's me helping them. Our organization volunteers helping someone. Imagine someone gets out of prison with just a photocopy of your prison ID. Here you go. Now rebuild your life. Almost impossible.
Oh, yeah. Especially now that everything is online. In order to renew my passport and my health card and my driver's license, I had to start doing everything online, and that was complicated enough for me. And I use the internet. I was born and bred with the internet. It is my lifeblood. Let alone for someone that has at best no computer access for long periods of time, no training in how it works. The system has entirely changed, and that is just in terms of government ID. Let alone finding a job. Almost everybody starts looking online and has an email address and knows how to use that. Form of credit check or background check, that is often online, and let alone how complicated that is for someone who was released from prison and now they have to figure out how to make that work. So it sounds like
you're a 55-year-old man. A 55-year-old man, you were in prison for 35 years. There was no internet. There was nothing, cell phones, other things like that 35 years ago. And you get out on the streets. I remember when I was released, it was very bizarre. So I get outside, and I see cars buzzing around. And I wasn't in that long, and it was very disorienting seeing cars and people milling around, all these different changes. But imagine if I was in 35 years or so, which is not uncommon, and everything's on your cell phone, and you've never used a cell phone before, you've never used anything or a computer or anything else. It's very disorienting, and maybe some guys just actually never get back into the swing of things. So even though they've been out for a few years, they're still been institutionalized, is what we call it, and they just need help the rest of their days because they've just been way too long.
I imagine then you also see the risk of the cycle happening all over again, because for some reason we as a society have decided that the community health, the mental health, the physical health for anyone who's dealing with anything close to houselessness, close to some form of drug use, or basically anything that doesn't fit a tiny little box, prison is apparently the easy solution, but we don't fund the prison as well, and it's a vicious cycle of people getting incarcerated or institutionalized for reasons and then getting released and being told, oh, you don't fit the societal rules and societal laws that we didn't teach you, by the way. So back in you go, and we do this all over again.
Yep.
You're just hitting your head against the wall and expecting something to happen.
Well, I often say this: the system of justice in Canada exists to benefit those that are administering it, because that's really who benefits. It is a revolving door. A guy in prison, all he has is time. You could spend all the time educating him or preparing him for eventual reintegration, and they don't. You just sit in your cell a lot of times. I was in Kingston Penitentiary, and you were locked up there 23 hours and 40 minutes a day in your cell, save for yard time when you go to yard for an hour, which happened every second day or so. So you have 23 hours and 40 minutes in your cell doing nothing. Couldn't that be better served? Like, give a person a book or, an educational program as part of it. Say, you get extra yard time if you do these exams or something. Something incentivizing, and it's just not there. And you say, what are we doing? We really are warehousing people in Canada. And when a person gets out, you shouldn't be surprised. There's no excuse for committing a crime. But a lot of guys say, I don't know any better, in the sense that he actually doesn't know any better. It's not an excuse. He's just been locked up away, and now he's on the streets. He doesn't know how to get, and he has nowhere to live. What do you do? And so it's a very short-sighted part of our system, and we could talk about that another time. Prison reform, the things I saw, but so we're trying to fix the one little problem, which is housing, and that's all I can do right now. So I am trying to do that.
And it is such an important part where, like, we've seen this time and time again with poverty projects, with housing projects, with nonprofits, that the number one way to determine whether someone will end up further in dire straits is not whether or not they have access to like a car or access to food or access to community. It's access to housing, because it creates that space that you can be all of that and take care of all of that. And once you start losing that housing, which people have been doing at very alarming rates, because there's very few places in Ontario specifically that rent is affordable and that has access to places like accessible jobs or like the resources that people need, and you don't need a car. Like, there's maybe 3 towns in the province that can do that for you, and you have to deal with minus 45-degree weather. So good luck.
Yeah, we're not asking for mansions for the guys, right? So, our first house is a modest home in a modest neighborhood. So I'll tell you, the first man I moved into a room. So he moved into the room. So he'd been inside 40 years, some crazy long time. Actually, never killed anybody. So he was a lifer, but who never killed anybody. He just problems in prison that kept other issues like that. So he gets out, and he's like almost 70 years old. And we take him to this room. It's a little semi-detached house. Take him to his room, and he starts crying. He says, because he'd come from a rooming house where he's being abused by the other people in the house, having his medication stolen, beaten up, an old man. So he comes to this house, and he starts crying. He says, I want to die here, because it was such an upgrade. And to anyone listening to this, it would be a downgrade of your lifestyle. I guarantee you, 100% downgrade of your lifestyle. But for him, it was such, because he goes, now this house is safe. I can make it my own, in a sense, and clean it up, get it the way I want. He started crying. And so his goal really was to have a nice place to die eventually, right? Again, these are the type of goals we're dealing with. No one's dreaming for the top of the mountain. They just want a safe place to live, to rebuild themselves, maybe connect with family again that they've lost touch with. I've had a lot of stories of that where someone who's living rough for years and now he has a safe place to live. He finally says, I'm going to reach out to my kids who I haven't seen in, say, 20 years. And they do connect. And it's a beautiful thing to see that now he has grandchildren that he never knew about. It's like those type of stories are just... they're heartwarming stories, and they only happen. A lot of those stories only happen because we were there to make it, in a sense, facilitate it happening.
Oh, absolutely. I truly don't think that they could have been connected if they didn't have a place to call their own and the community around them. And it sounds like, as much as having that room, having that space, having that privacy is an important part of it, it's also the community around them, the people that are able to be with them and say, I know your story, I know who you are, and I accept and appreciate that we're all in this together. And so how has that community sort of made a difference or made an impact on those who are living there?
Well, if you can imagine, so these are people who've been to prison. So the rest of society has always judged their prison experience negatively, saying, oh, you've been to prison, I'm going to discriminate against you for a job or housing. Whereas we say, you've been to prison, you have a chance to live here because of that. I'm actively seeking you out because of your past criminal history to give you another chance to rebuild your lives. And then in this setting here, you're going to meet people who care about you and want you to succeed, want you to do well in life. we're volunteers, the part of society we call in prison the square society that you would never have a chance to interact with. Now you're getting a chance to meet these people. They're good people. They want the best for you. They want you to rebuild your life, maybe connect with your family. They're giving you a chance. And I always say to the guys, what you make of this opportunity is entirely up to you. I'm holding you accountable in the sense that if you want to succeed, rebuild your life, here's your chance. And then take it from there. Now, some guys, they fail. They have other issues, the drug demons or mental health issues, etc. But for the ones that don't, that's what keeps us going, because we know if that opportunity wasn't there, this person wouldn't have connected with his grandchildren now after 30 years, which, some crazy story like that, which we've had. Or this person who was in a storage locker now is actually that person transitioned to living on his own, crime-free. What would have happened to him if he was living on the streets? He might have committed a crime, gone back to jail or prison, etc. These type of things. So again, I don't want anyone to think it's a handout. It's just a hand up. So we give a person a chance, and let's say 1 out of 10, it's actually a better record than that, but if 1 out of 10 takes that chance to rebuild their lives for the better, that helps society as a whole for the better in the long run. And if you think of utilitarian, it makes everyone feel better. Society's a better place for that, if you want to talk philosophy. So I think it's a small price to pay for a great benefit for society, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Absolutely. One question that has been on my mind a little bit throughout all of this is specifically because of COVID, when I do get on social media and the one thing that pops up whenever someone says, oh, this person was released from prison or there's a homeless encampment somewhere, is immediately someone says more cops, more law enforcement engagement. And I'm wondering if that is something that you've had to deal with RJHO and have to deal with either law enforcement making themselves known or neighbors being willing to call the cops if need be, or has that been something that you've worked very hard to put a lid on?
Well, that's probably two-part answer. So as for neighbors, again, our goal is to be better tenants than the average tenant.
Mm-hmm.
So when guys move in, I say, you got to be a good neighbor to everyone. You got to take this, they say, we have one house, there's an old woman who lives on the left of that house. I say, you take her garbage to the front of the street. You shovel the driveway. You shovel in front of the sidewalk. You shovel the fire hydrants. You be great guys so that when people find out, hey, there's this ex-cons living in this house here, they go, wow, really? I didn't know. They're actually better tenants than the last guy that lived there. We've had many houses where the neighbor says, once they find out, there's 4 ex-cons living there, they go, wow, you guys are much better than the previous residents of this home that's being rented. So that's something that's always been a goal of ours, and it's sort of lived up that way. We introduce ourselves to the police precinct in the area and make them known, but they're not harassing us or bothering us, and the guys are not committing crimes. Arguably they shouldn't be involved with our house at all. Maybe they drive by once in a while extra. I don't know, but it's actually never. The police have never been an issue. They've been supportive in a sense that, one member of our board is a retired police detective. They know, you can lock people up, but there's, sooner or later they get out. What do you do? What do they do? And she's been a really good conduit with the police forces to talk to them about that. And it actually have never been a negative. The police in the area have never been a negative for us.
That is all really good to hear. I think of growing up, I grew up in Scarborough, and there's always a couple houses in our neighborhood that were totally fine. Maybe some interesting folks moved in and they were there for 6 months or so and not a problem. And it was only until once word got out that it was usually a halfway house or some sort of transitional housing, that is when all the parents in the neighborhood, they would start saying, but how could you have these folks in our neighborhood? Or how could you do this to us? When at most, they had a 3 a.m. party in the summer. But to my knowledge,
we do not have really 3 a.m. parties. I'm going to tell you right now, we do not have 3 a.m. parties.
That makes a difference.
It makes a difference, yeah. You have to be better neighbors than that. And I understand if I was like a regular square on the street and I go, that house down there has 4 or 5 ex-cons living there, I would probably be nervous. But if you give them a chance, you see, well, that house is actually well maintained or better maintained than the neighbors, right? Or they shovel the driveway. If you look at them, so I think all our guys want to be judged on their present actions, not what they did 20 or 30 years ago, but what they're doing now. And if you look at them now, they're doing a better job than an average. And you say, well, then why is it a problem if they're on the street? If they're actually good neighbors, their homes are well maintained, there's not an issue, they're not partying, not making noise, that's better than someone else randomly might be here, might be much worse. So again, anyone listening, if you interact with an ex-prisoner, I'd say judge them on how they act now, not on what they did 20 or 30 years ago for which they served their sentence. There are life sentences, but in your interactions, judge them on how you met them now and how they behave now, and you'll probably both benefit.
Oh, absolutely. And I hope that is something that we all strive towards, especially as we're dealing with on the church end. A lot of us are very good, like I said, at feeding the hungry, going to welcome the refugee, dealing with the welcoming the prisoner, visiting the prisoner part. That part we tend to sort of say, we'll get to that. That's on my to-do list, I promise. And something I know that has been big on our end is talking about funding for this sort of thing. And I'm wondering, for the funding, how is the program actually funded through? I know it's through, some of it is the Ontario Works and ODSP checks that they get, and that
Okay.
covers some of the rent.
Yeah. So, well, we're entirely donor funded in the standpoint the organization was set up by donations probably from the original board members. They put in their own money, I think, and through other donations. But so in Ontario for housing, the individual is funded directly. So yeah, so a person would come to us with, let's say, Ontario Works. They're getting 397. So we would pool. Let's say we have four guys in the house putting 397 each. Obviously, our rent for renting the home from a landlord is much higher. So then we put their 397s together, and then we cover the difference in the rent to our landlord, and we cover utilities and everything else. So that's a charity part of the donation. I think it averages out about $400 or so a month that we're subsidizing each resident in a home. And that again comes from donations. We've had some foundations been giving us money. I think originally we did consider partnering up with like Correctional Services Canada, but as you know, they would part some of their funding. Again, I actually prefer men who've just come out of prison are still on parole because there's an element of supervision from the parole system, and they wanted to pay us, a more formal partnership. And I believe the board turned it down because Correctional Service Canada had different policies than we did. So we have a spiritual element which they probably wouldn't want. We have our focus on reintegrating society, which maybe they're still focused on the punishment aspect of it, and it wouldn't work. So yeah, we could be. I could pay a lot more money if I was working for the government, but so I'm a part-time employee from an organization that gets all their money from donations. So it's really, if anyone's listening, it's actually not a very lucrative job in any way, but it is very spiritually rewarding. So if you have a spiritual bank account, I am overflowing with that. So
There's a
so any
crime
donation
doesn't
would be
pay.
helpful.
There's a crime doesn't
Crime
pay
does not
joke
pay.
somewhere in there, and we're just gonna
Yeah,
let it marinate.
there are a lot of crime doesn't pay jokes for some. I guess if you give it up, it doesn't pay. That's true.
It offers some job opportunities, but not nearly as much as one might expect. But yeah, and like this is, I think, some of the spiritual aspect of it has been fascinating for me personally, because when I first heard about it was through one of your colleagues who was at the church I was working at, and he was asking that church for funding and support. And there's something about that where you're trying to find that balance of churches have often been involved in the prison system. It is unfortunately been a lot of sort of like on the extreme end, the Bible thumping of the reason you're going through this is because you don't have enough Jesus in your heart. And once you have enough Jesus in your heart, we'll let you out. And that
Yes.
doesn't seem to answer a lot of problems, but there, as long as I've been in this business, there's been this very clear need for people to have some form of spiritual center for themselves, whether it is through religion or some form of philosophy or whatever, that helps ground them and connect them with others and say, what I'm doing is impacting me this way, it's impacting people in other ways, and how can we change that so that it's a positive thing and not a negative thing? And what is that spiritual connection that we're talking about for RJHO?
Well, I agree with that. You say, why are churches involved? And the answer is probably obvious. No one else wants to do it. No one else wants to make that dramatic step, right? It's like, again, there's no, if you tell our average citizen saying, well, prison is really a horrible place. It's dirty, it's dangerous, etc. Their initial response for most people is, good, I'm glad, right? They shouldn't have committed the crime. They wouldn't do this. But again, but for the grace of God sort of situation. It could have been you and some other, maybe you wouldn't, maybe you got hooked on drugs, or one of your children got hooked on drugs and they committed a crime, etc. You could see perhaps your child in that situation if you can't visualize yourself in it. Anything's possible. So there is so the church groups have been involved with us because no one else is really stepping up. And the spiritual element, I think, is very important because if you just dwell on the negative of your life, you've been in prison for 25, 30 years, or the crimes you committed, it can be overwhelming. It could break you. But if you say, I'm here for a bigger purpose, or when I'm alone or I'm suffering, I have something else to look up to motivate me to keep going on, to persist, that's a beautiful thing. And again, my perspective is whatever it takes for someone to succeed, I'll support that. If it's religion or anything else, or some spirituality or whatever, that's a fantastic thing. So I would argue that most prisoners are more religious than the average person, just because you have a lot of time to be contemplative in prison, and you're going to talk. If you believe in God, you have a lot of time to talk to God in prison if you're locked up.
If it worked for the Buddha, it will work for other people. But yeah, it's been a huge part for many people, especially as they're dealing with this idea of redemption, this idea that we are not our worst mistake or worst actions in our lives. We can strive to be better, we can strive to do better, and we can strive to make that whole again, which I think is like that restorative part of all of this. And like I think it's the part that I'm always sitting with for RJHO is that we got the Ontario part that's covered, the housing part that makes sense. I'm with you. The justice part even that makes sense. The restorative part. I'm wondering if you want to talk about what that restorative part is.
Well, I'm going to tell you the story of what, the sort of divine intervention story I alluded to earlier. Now, I'll tell you the story, and you'll probably take the restorative element from it. So, at one time, I found myself in Kingston Penitentiary, which is now since closed, but at that time, it was, I believe, Canada's oldest operating maximum security prison, and it was set to close that year that I was there. And because of it, the system wasn't putting any money into fixing the institution up. So we had, on this, the range is a collection of cells. So we had 15 cells on the bottom, 15 on top, and they'd all look face forward to the windows, and the windows were broken. There's a lot of broken windows. It was February. It was freezing cold. Snow and wind are blowing in. Guys would take their extra t-shirt and they shove it in the holes of the broken windows. The floor was burned from previous riots, from tear gas. It was dirty. It was dark. We had a washer dryer to wash all our clothes. We get 2 pairs of pants, 2 pairs of shirts, 2 underwear, and we'd have a washer dryer there. The washing machine was broken, so you'd have to wash your clothes in your sink with a bar of soap, and then you dry it in the dryer. The dryer did work, but it was so cold, so at night, the last guy who's out, you had to pull off the exhaust vent from the dryer, and you'd drop it on the floor, and then turn on the dryer so it would blow warm air into the range so guys could fall asleep. So in short, it was the worst prison I've ever been in. It was a terrible place. So I was there long enough that I was offered the job of cleaner. Now, cleaner, as the name implies, is you clean the range, and in return, you get, I think, $5 a day or $5.25 a day as your pay. But I did it because, again, I mentioned earlier, you were locked up there 23 hours and 40 minutes a day, and the 20 minutes is usually for shower time. But I wanted to be able to walk out as a cleaner out of my cell because I'd have access to the phone, because I had 2 small children then, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, that I wanted to call them before school or after school. Otherwise, I'd never know when my cell would be open up for shower time, and I would miss them, maybe too late at night or too early in the morning, and I wouldn't get a chance to talk to them. So I took this job, and I'm doing the cleaner job, and part of the job is handing out food trays. So I'm handing out food trays, and the guys in this range knew that I really didn't fit. This is a really tough range. You heard the expression about people have a tattoo of a teardrop under their eye. It means they've killed somebody, right? So about a quarter of the guys there had the markings of really hard guys. And I used to joke that said the only teardrop I had on me was when I left on my pillow at night crying from where I was. So I was not the toughest guy in this range. That's the long and short of it. So I would hand out the food trays, and the guys would start riding me. They'd insult me a little bit, push back on me. And when I went to prison, I decided I would never let people intimidate me. I would push back, and I would take a beating if I had to, but I didn't want to be a victim in this setting, this really rough setting, because whatever reputation you have, it follows you throughout prison. So if you're a victim, you'll be abused throughout the whole prison system. So this one inmate named Frankie, he said something disparaging to me. I can't remember what it was, and I responded to him in a way. I probably crossed the prison code of what we're allowed to say to somebody. I went over the line in my insult back to him. And then loud enough for all 30 guys on this range to hear, Frankie shouted out, "When my cell gets cracked open," and cracked open means open for shower time, "when my cell gets cracked open, I'm going to come over to yours and I'm going to effing kill you." And it didn't put effing, as you can imagine. I'm going to effing so, and everyone heard this. And because of where we were and who Frankie was, everyone knew him, so he'd been inside a long time. He was at least obligated to try to kill me. Like, everyone knew this. So I went back to my cell, which was the only one that was unlocked because I was a cleaner. And as I'm walking to the cell, I hear all the guys are betting on this fight that's going to happen. So at one point, I heard someone say, I was a 3 bags of chip to 1 underdog. So people are betting food in prison. There's no money, so we're betting food. So I was a 3 bags of chip to 1 underdog in this fight. So I go into my cell, I shut the light, and I know nothing good is going to happen next. When Frankie, he was in one of the first 5 cells, so his cell is going to be open shortly. Either I miraculously win this fight somehow and I get extra time in prison for fighting. More likely, I get maimed, or I get killed in my cell. So there's nothing good is going to happen next. And I was not a terribly religious person, maybe not at all back then, I don't recall, but certainly not terribly religious. And I shut the light and I start praying. And a certain point, the prayer became a negotiation with God, which is maybe a little funny. And I said, God, if you can help me get through this and get back to my children alive and well, I promise to take some good from the bad of my experiences to help other people. Now, I either said that in my mind loudly, or I said it out of my mouth. I don't recall, but I said it loud enough that I felt the words. And as soon as I said it, there was an explosion of metal I'd never heard before, like a boom, and then another explosion, boom, and then feet were stomping towards my cell door, like bang, 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 coming at my door. And I go, well, must be Frankie, must be open. He must get some guys to help him to finish me off. So I get ready for some fight that's going to happen against, at least 1 to 5 guys. And all of a sudden, this arm reaches out and grabs my cage door and pulls it shut, and it clangs and it locks. And then 2, 3, 4 correctional officers run past my door, down the hall, down the range. And once I catch my breath, of course, I'm all shocked by what just happened. I clump to my cage door and I push my face against the bars so I can look down the hallway. And I see 2 correctional officers with a stretcher. And they're in my view, and then they go out of my view. And when they come back in my view moments later, on that stretcher is Frankie having a seizure, flailing around. They take him away. I never see him again. Within a week after that, I had a parole suspension hearing. And I was apparently the only person that I was told by the chaplain there in the last 5 years to win this hearing. And when the week after that, I'm back in a park in Toronto playing my children.
Wow.
So either that was it's always moving for me. That was either an incredible coincidence or divine intervention that I spoke about. But all I know is I made a promise right before that happened. And from that moment forward, I've tried to keep that promise that I made to take some good, to help other people from my bad experience. And so when people ask me, would you speak on this group or talk to this group or whatnot, I always say yes, because I feel it's part of keeping my promise. And so that's what I've been doing. So I'm here to keep my promise by trying to help others.
There was definitely some part of the universe that was watching over you and said, like, we got to get you home, and we got to get you home, like, right now, because it is time.
It's too bad for Frankie, though, unfortunately. I hope
poor
he made
Frankie.
it.
Poor Frankie. I hope that it was just a warning for him, but we will.
Just a warning, yeah, that's right.
At the very least, no one got hurt. So, but yeah.
So after that, the guys in the range thought that I had poisoned Frankie. This is what the kind of people we're dealing with here, hard guys, because I was handing out food trays. They go, how else did they explain it? Right before the fight's about to happen, Frankie has a seizure, takes away. I must have poisoned him, because that's what they would do to win a fight. And I don't think I had a lot of divine intervention talk in prison to say, no, I actually didn't poison Frankie. That was divine intervention. But so I'm just glad it worked out for the best, and and I can help other people because of it.
And we're glad that you're here and that you've made it out safe and sound, and that you're able to both share your story and continue to help make this corner of the universe a little bit of a better place for some people that are looking for that second or third chance to make themselves a little bit better and to get back on their feet. And I think for our listeners, if there's anything that you want them to know in terms of how to support, how to connect with you guys, if there's things that you would like the world at large to do, how do they either reach you, or where do they start?
All right. Well, the best way is probably our website, since we're talking about the modern age now. It's rjho.ca. You can find out more about us there. You can find out ways to donate. You can find out ways to volunteer. And we can start from there, and maybe meet me, and I'll tell you some more prison stories, which a little more. Those are PG stories from here today. I have some more extreme stories, because prison is a very rough place, but I tell stories when people want to tell them. Yes. I do speaking to any different groups, corporations, professional bodies, schools, etc., if they want. But going to rjho.ca and work from there, and we can help each other out, hopefully.
Sounds like a good plan to me, and thank you so much for being a part of today. I know that this is always an important thing to do, to share this story and to share the work that's being done here, so that we could take care of each other. And so thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you and pleasure interacting with your audience. Thank you very much.